What if the voice you have spent your life searching for has always been speaking from the center of your own being, not from the sky, not from history, not from an image outside you, but from the one place you keep overlooking because it feels too close to be divine, the simple sense of being, the quiet, undeniable fact that before you are anything else, you are. And this is where the whole mystery begins. Because the world trains you to believe in causes outside yourself. It teaches you to look outward for power, outward for permission, outward for meaning, outward for salvation. It tells you that the source of your life is somewhere else, acting upon you, arranging you, helping you, or hindering you from a distance. And because that belief is repeated so often, you begin to live as though your reality were happening to you rather than through you. But the deeper truth is far more intimate than that. What first seems to come from without, one day must be heard from within. At an early stage of awareness, truth appears as though it were external. A voice speaking, a God addressing man. A revelation descending from beyond the self. That is how the sleeping mind first receives it, because it is not yet prepared to discover that the speaker and the hearer are not two. It still needs distance. It still imagines the sacred as separate. It still believes power must stand outside the person in order to be real. But eventually that arrangement collapses. And when it collapses, everything changes. Because now the voice is no longer other. The authority is no longer elsewhere. The divine name is no longer a word to be admired. It becomes identity. This is why the simplest phrase becomes the most important one in all of consciousness. I am. Not I will be. Not I want to be. Not I hope someday to become. I am. That is the root. Before every condition you attach to yourself, there is this prior fact. Before you say rich or poor, wanted or ignored, free or trapped, whole or broken, there is this unqualified beingness. And because it is so constant, so immediate, so ordinary seeming, most people never stop to realize that this is the name of the power they seek. They use it all day long without reverence. They fill it with fear, with doubt, with memory, with limitation. They say, I am tired, I am behind, I am unlucky, I am not enough, and then wonder why life continues to echo those states back to them. But consciousness is faithful. It does not debate what you claim as yourself. It reflects it. So the real question is not whether you believe in God in some distant religious sense. The real question is, what are you calling yourself with the words, I am? Because whatever follows that root becomes your state, and your state becomes your world. This is why Scripture, rightly understood, is not merely speaking of historical characters. These names are states of consciousness, movements of awareness, stages in the unfolding of the deeper being in man. At first, man hears truth as though it was spoken from outside. Later, he discovers that what he thought was external revelation was always inward awakening. What first appeared as command becomes realization. What first looked like another being addressing him becomes the discovery that the deepest speaker was his own indwelling reality. And this movement from hearing the sacred as outside to knowing it as within is one of the great turning points in the spiritual life. Because until then, you live in divided faith. You may speak beautifully of God, yet secretly believe circumstances govern you. You may pray fervently, yet still think causes are outside. You may read sacred words, yet continue to bow before appearances as though they were final. But once the center shifts inward, faith becomes something altogether different. Now prayer is no longer begging, it is appropriation. The subjective appropriation of the objective hope. That means this: if there is something you desire, true prayer is not asking some distant power to give it to you. It is inwardly assuming the reality of it. It is claiming it in consciousness. It is feeling yourself into the state where it is already so. It is saying, in effect, I am this now. not because the senses confirm it, but because you are willing to let consciousness precede fact. And that is what the world resists, because the world wants proof first. It says, see it, then believe it. Get it, then feel secure. Be chosen, then feel worthy. Receive the outcome, then assume the identity. But consciousness works in reverse. You do not receive and then become. You become and then receive. Are you waiting for reality to name you? Or are you seeing that reality has always been reflecting the name you quietly give yourself? That question cuts deeply because it returns power to its source. If the divine name lives as your own awareness of being, then the moment you attach an identity to I am, you are no longer making an empty statement. You are specifying a state. You are selecting a reality. You are using the creative center itself. This is why people can pray constantly and still remain unchanged, because they are praying to distance while inwardly remaining loyal to the same state. They ask for abundance while still feeling I am deprived. They ask for love while still feeling I am overlooked. They ask for freedom while still feeling I am bound. They ask for peace while inwardly affirming conflict. And the deeper assumption always wins, because the state you dwell in silently is more powerful than the words you speak publicly. What if the issue has never been your lack of desire, but your unwillingness to become inwardly what you seek outwardly? That is the deeper challenge. Not desire, identity. Not hope, embodiment. Not ritual, realization. And this is where imagination becomes sacred. Not as fantasy, as the very medium through which the indwelling power acts. If you can imagine the fulfilled state and feel its reality, you are already touching the place where manifestation begins. Not because the image itself is magic, but because imagination allows you to enter a new state of being. And once entered, that state begins to organize perception, reaction, behavior, expectation, and eventually the outer pattern of events. Imagination is not escape from reality. It is entry into causation. So when you say I am, and then dare to name the state you would occupy if your desire were already fulfilled, you are not pretending. You are praying in the only way that actually transforms. You are appropriating inwardly what you had formerly placed in the future. You are no longer standing outside the door of life, asking to be let in. You are entering. If it were already true, who would you be now? Not tomorrow, now. What would you feel if the burden were lifted? How would you think if the matter was settled? How would you move through the day if you were already the one you long to be? Those are not motivational questions. They are creative questions, because they move you from wanting into being, and reality answers being, not because it is sentimental, because it is lawful. This is also why external religion can become such a comfortable disguise for unconscious living. You can bow before symbols, repeat names, attend services, speak of faith, and still never confront the one place where the drama is actually occurring, your own consciousness. You can worship an image and remain inwardly unchanged. You can call something holy while still treating your own imagination as secondary. You can honor a distant God while continuing to fill I am with fear. But once you begin to realize that the divine center is within, that comfort ends. Now every assumption matters. Now every self-definition matters. Now every repeated inner claim matters, because the temple is no longer elsewhere. It is you. And the one speaking in that temple is the same one you have been seeking all along. This realization is not meant to inflate the ego. It dissolves it. Because the little self that wanted control, validation, and superiority is not the source being revealed here. What is being revealed is deeper than personality, deeper than biography, deeper than the role you are presently playing. It is the root of being itself, the one that never leaves you, the one that says, I am before all qualities and survives all changes of condition. That root is not wounded by the states it enters. It only expresses through them. And that is why no present condition is final. If you have misused the name, you can use it anew. If you have attached it to limitation, you can attach it to freedom. If you have long said, I am, followed by the language of defeat, you can begin to claim another state. And if you persist, the new assumption hardens into fact, not because words are powerful in themselves, because identity is, this is the first great awakening, that the name is not separate from you, that the source is not outside you, that the one you seek is the one by which you seek, and that every time you say, I am, you stand at the doorway of creation. So tonight the question is not whether the divine is real. The question is whether you are ready to stop placing it elsewhere, whether you are ready to believe that your own wonderful awareness of being is the indwelling reality from which all states are formed, whether you are ready to treat I am not as a casual phrase, but as the sacred root of identity. And if you are, then everything becomes more exact, more intimate, more demanding, and more liberating all at once. Because now you know where reality begins. Not in events, not in circumstance, not in external approval, but in the name concentrated in you. Once you begin to feel that the center is within, another question appears almost immediately. Then why do I still live as though the world has authority over me? Because that is the real contradiction. You may hear that the divine reality is within. You may even agree with it, but agreement is not yet embodiment. And unless it becomes embodiment, life continues to be shaped by old reflexes. You still react to circumstances as though they were causes. You still consult appearances before identity. You still let events tell you who you are instead of realizing that events are already telling back to you what you have been assuming. That is why the old way of living must be exposed. The old way says, I will believe when I see. I will feel secure when things improve. I will call myself blessed when the proof arrives. I will trust when life becomes easier. But that is not faith. That is reaction. And reaction always keeps you one step behind your own power. Because the world you see is not announcing what is possible. It is revealing what has already been accepted in consciousness. It is a shadow of inner arrangement, a delayed statement, a surface echo. So if you wait for appearances to authorize a new identity, you remain bound to the old one. This is why true prayer is so different from what most people call prayer. Prayer is not asking a distant power to rearrange your life while you remain the same. Prayer is inward appropriation. It is the subjective assumption of the objective hope. It is taking inwardly what you had formerly placed outside yourself and ahead of yourself. It is saying in essence, this is mine now because I am this now. That is a daring thing because it means you stop standing before life as a petitioner. You begin to stand within life as a creator. What are you assuming right now when no one is watching? That question matters more than public belief ever will. Because your hidden assumptions are your real theology. They are the true religion you practice. You may say, God is with me, and still inwardly feel abandoned. You may say, all things are possible, while secretly believing your case is different. You may speak of grace while still identifying as one who must struggle, wait, and suffer longer than others before receiving anything. And consciousness answers the deeper assumption, always. That is why so much religious language remains powerless in practice. It is spoken from divided identity. One part of the self is repeating sacred words. Another part is still kneeling before the evidence of limitation. And a divided state cannot generate a coherent world. It can only prolong mixture, small improvements, temporary openings, partial reliefs, while the root assumption remains untouched. But the moment you realize that the divine name is your own awareness of being, everything becomes practical. Now the issue is not what you say ceremonially, but what you claim inwardly. Not what formula you use, but what identity you occupy. Not what doctrine you admire, but what state you live from. Because I am is not descriptive only, it is creative. Whatever follows it becomes your dwelling place in consciousness. And whatever becomes your dwelling place becomes the atmosphere of your life. If you say, I am forgotten, life reflects neglect. If you say, I am burdened, life presents weight. If you say, I am too late, life arranges delay. If you say, I am never chosen, life mirrors exclusion. Not because the world is against you, because you are instructing it. This is difficult to hear only so long as you still want life to be external. But the moment you accept inward causation, the same truth becomes profoundly liberating. Because now nothing is absolutely fixed. No condition is ultimate. No current circumstance has the right to define your future unless you keep identifying with it. If assumption creates reality, then a change assumption changes destiny. Not tomorrow first, now first. Are you still asking circumstances for permission to become who you are? Because that is what most people do without realizing it. They wait for money before feeling abundant. They wait for a message before feeling loved. They wait for success before feeling capable. They wait for relief before feeling free. And all the while, they are strengthening the state of not yet. But not yet is also an identity. And reality reflects that too. This is why the movement must reverse. You do not become after you receive. You receive after you become. You do not call yourself by the fulfilled name because the world has already changed. The world changes because you dared to call yourself by that name inwardly and remain there. This is the deeper meaning of faith. Not optimism, not positive thinking, not emotional intensity. Faith is loyalty to the unseen state. It is the willingness to say, I am, and then name the fulfilled condition even when reason hesitates and the senses deny it. It is not hysteria. It is not theatrical. It is quiet, controlled, interior, and exact. It feels less like forcing and more like occupying. Less like chanting and more like settling. Something in you stops begging and begins abiding. If it were already true, what would you now be calling yourself? Not later now. Would you still be saying you are confused? Would you still be saying you are unsafe? Would you still be saying you're unwanted, unlucky, or unprovided for? Or would another I am begin to feel possible? I am secure. I am guided. I am wanted. I am supplied. I am free. I am already the one I have longed to become. This is not empty self-talk when felt from within. This is state selection. And state selection is the essence of conscious creation. The world resists this because it has trained itself in external cause. It prefers idols, systems, visible powers, social explanations, even suffering sometimes, anything rather than the intimacy of inward responsibility. It would rather say, that happened because of them, or because of the economy, or because of fate, or because of timing, than admit the more unsettling truth that consciousness has been participating all along. But the deeper you awaken, the less satisfying external blame becomes. Not because outer factors never exist on their own level, but because they are no longer the source level. The source level is identity, and identity lives in the use of I am. This is why sin, in its deepest psychological sense, is simply missing the mark through misidentification. It is not first moral scandal. It is aim gone wrong. It is continuing to fill the divine root with states you no longer wish to experience. It is calling yourself by names that bind, then suffering the reflection of those names in form. The mark is fulfilled being. The miss is continued identification with lack. Unless you believe that I am He, you die in your sins, not as punishment, as law. If you do not awaken to the indwelling name, you remain bound to mistaken causation. You go on missing because you are aiming from the wrong self-concept. You keep praying outward while inwardly repeating the very identity from which you seek escape. But the moment the center shifts, prayer becomes exact. Now you do not ask for what you are unwilling to assume. You do not beg for a state while secretly feeling yourself separate from it. You realize that to pray truly is to enter, to claim, to feel, to become. And from there, something very quiet begins to change. Your inner conversations shift. Your reactions soften. Your sense of possibility expands. Your dependence on outer confirmation begins to weaken. Why? Because you are no longer standing outside the desired state. You are standing in it. Are you trying to get somewhere, or are you beginning to live from there? That is the real question. The one trying still feels distance. The one living from the end has collapsed it. This does not mean the outer world changes instantly in every detail, but it does mean the whole current has changed direction. A bridge of incident begins to form. Thoughts, events, people, timings, things you could not have arranged by surface logic start moving in relation to the new state. Not because you manipulated the world, but because the world is answering identity. That is why persistence matters so deeply. Not strain, not anxiety, persistence. The old state was made natural by repetition. The new state must be made natural the same way. You return to it. You dwell in it. You use I am deliberately until the fulfilled identity begins to feel less like imagination and more like self. And when that happens, reality has no choice but to mirror what has become natural to consciousness. This is why you must stop treating imagination as secondary. If God is within, imagination is not a toy. It is the form in which inward causation operates. It is the faculty by which you touch states before the senses confirm them. It is how you move from longing to embodiment. The imaginal act, when joined with feeling, is prayer in action. So the question is no longer whether you believe in a distant God. The question is whether you are ready to trust the God concentrated in your own awareness of being. Whether you are ready to say, I am, with reverence. Whether you are ready to stop filling that sacred root with fear. Whether you are ready to let identity become the place where prayer begins. Because once that begins, life is never the same again. You stop seeking the source. You start using it consciously. What if the world you keep trying to change is not the cause of anything you experience? What if it is only the evidence, not the source, not the origin, not the power, just the echo? Because that is where the real shift begins. Not when you learn a new technique, not when you gather more information, but when you finally see that everything you have been reacting to has always been responding quietly, faithfully, without argument. Because reality does not decide what to show you. It reflects what you are being. And the moment you begin to see this, not as an idea, but as a pattern in your own life, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how certain assumptions repeat themselves, how the same emotional themes return, how the same kinds of people appear, how the same outcomes seem to follow you, even when circumstances change. Different places, different situations, but the same underlying experience. Why? Because the state has not changed, and the state is the cause, not the outer scene, not the visible condition, but the invisible identity you have been occupying. This is why two people can stand in the same environment and live in completely different realities. One sees opportunity, the other sees limitation. One feels supported, the other feels alone. One moves with quiet certainty, the other hesitates in doubt. Nothing outside has changed, only the state, and the state determines perception. Perception determines reaction. Reaction reinforces identity, and identity continues the cycle, so the world appears consistent. But it is not consistent because it is fixed. It is consistent because you are, because you keep returning to the same state, often without noticing. Have you ever asked yourself, what am I assuming right now? not what you say, not what you post, not what you claim in moments of motivation, but what you quietly expect, what you silently believe will happen, what you feel is most likely. Because expectation is a form of assumption, and assumption shapes experience. If you expect to be overlooked, you will notice every moment of neglect. If you expect things to go wrong, you will interpret every delay as confirmation. If you expect rejection, even neutral situations will feel threatening, because perception is not neutral. It is filtered through your state. This is why trying to change the outer world directly becomes exhausting. You try harder, you push more, you control more, you analyze more, and yet the same patterns remain, because you are trying to change the reflection without changing what is being reflected. It is like arguing with a mirror, demanding that it show something different, while refusing to move. The mirror is not the problem. It is accurate, it is obedient. It shows you what you are presenting to it. Reality is the same. It does not resist you. It reflects you. So the real question is not, how do I change my life? The real question is, what am I showing life right now? Because whatever you are showing it, it is returning. Not because life is conscious in the way you imagine, but because consciousness is life, and you are that consciousness. This is why the idea of you pushed out is not poetic. It is structural. Everything you encounter is filtered through your state. Everything you interpret is shaped by your identity. Everything you experience is organized by your assumption. So when you change the state, you change the entire system. Not instantly in appearance, but immediately in direction. And direction determines destination. Are you trying to control outcomes, or are you changing the state that produces them? Because control belongs to fear. It tries to fix what appears. It reacts. It interferes. It doubts. But state selection belongs to awareness. It chooses. It settles. It assumes. It becomes. And becoming is what creates. This is why feeling is so central. Not emotion in the unstable sense, but the deep, quiet knowing of being. Because thinking can be divided. You can think one thing and feel another. You can say, I know it will work, while feeling uncertainty. And the feeling wins. Because feeling is identity. It is what you are being. So if you imagine something but do not feel it as real, you remain outside it. Still wanting, still hoping, still separate. But when you feel it, not forcefully, but naturally, as though it is already true, you enter it, you occupy it, you become it. And once you become it, reality begins to reorganize around it. Not because you forced it, but because you aligned with it. This is why the difference between wanting and being is everything. Wanting says, I don't have it yet. Being says, it is who I am now. Wanting creates distance. Being collapses it. Wanting waits. Being expresses. So the moment you catch yourself wanting, pause. Not to suppress it, but to shift it from wanting to being. If it were already yours, how would you feel? Stay there, not for a second, but long enough for it to become familiar. Because familiarity is what makes a state natural. And what is natural feels real. And what feels real manifests. This is the sequence. Not complicated, but precise. You do not need to control the world. You need to stabilize the state. You do not need to fix every detail. You need to become the version of you for whom those details are already resolved. Because that version exists, not in the future, but as a state available now. And imagination is how you access it, not by escaping reality, but by selecting a different one, internally, before it appears externally. And once selected, lived. Because imagination without embodiment is still distance, but imagination with feeling is identity. And identity creates. So the next time you find yourself reacting, Pause. Ask yourself, am I reacting to reality or reinforcing a state? Because most reactions are repetitions. They are not new. They are familiar. And familiarity is what keeps them alive. But awareness interrupts that. Awareness gives you a choice to continue or to shift. And that shift, even if subtle, changes everything. Because now you are no longer unconscious. You are choosing. And the moment you begin choosing your state, you begin creating your world. Not accidentally, but deliberately. What if the problem was never the image you see, but the level from which you are seeing it? Because there are ways of seeing that create distance. And there are ways of seeing that create reality. Most people only know the first. They look at the world with what could be called a single vision, where things are exactly as they appear, nothing more. A situation is just a situation. A person is just who they show themselves to be. A limitation is simply a fact. And from that level, reality feels fixed, solid, unchangeable. So they react. They adjust behavior. They try to fix what they see. They accept what appears as final. But this level of seeing has no creative power. It only observes. And observation without awareness becomes submission. Because if what you see is all that exists, then you are bound to it. But what if that is not the only way of seeing? What if there is another way? An inward way, where what you see is no longer the end of reality, but the surface of it? Because once you begin to turn inward, vision changes. You no longer see just with the eyes. You begin to see with awareness. And awareness does not stop at appearance. It interprets. It reshapes. It redefines. This is where imagination begins to move from passive to active. Because now you are no longer looking at reality. You are looking through it. And what you see begins to carry meaning. Symbol. Possibility. Not in a false way, but naturally. You start to notice that what appears outside is not separate from what is moving inside. And once that connection becomes visible, a new kind of seeing opens. Not physical, psychological, creative, alive. Because now you are no longer limited to what is present. You can introduce what is not yet visible. Not by denying reality, but by redefining it internally. This is where most people hesitate. Because it feels like imagination is just imagination. It feels like you are pretending, like you're ignoring facts, like you are stepping away from reality. But the truth is the opposite. You are stepping into causation. Because imagination is not meant to describe what is. It is meant to select what will be. And that selection happens through vision. Not the eyes, the inner sight. Have you ever looked at something and felt something completely different from what it appeared to be? That is the beginning. That is the shift. Because now you are not confined to surface perception. You are introducing interpretation. And interpretation changes experience. For example, two people can look at the same situation. One sees failure, the other sees transition. One sees rejection, the other sees redirection. One sees delay, the other sees preparation. Nothing outside has changed, but the meaning has. And meaning is what shapes emotional response. Emotional response shapes identity. Identity shapes reality. So the moment you change how you see something, you begin to change what it becomes. Not instantly in form, but immediately in direction. This is why inner vision matters more than outer evidence. Because outer evidence is always behind. It reflects what has already been assumed. But inner vision is ahead. It introduces what is about to be expressed. So if you continue to rely only on what you see physically, you will always be reacting to the past. But if you begin to trust what you see inwardly, you begin to create the future. Are you seeing with your eyes or with your state? Because your state determines what feels real. And what feels real becomes dominant. So if your inner vision is weak, the outer world will dominate. It will define you. It will control your reactions. It will dictate your identity. But if your inner vision is stable, the outer world begins to follow. Not because you force it, but because you no longer accept it as final. This is where the idea of states becomes essential. Because everything you see externally is an expression of a state, not a fixed truth, not a permanent condition. A state, and states can change, but only if you stop identifying with them. Because the moment you say, this is how it is, you lock yourself into it. But the moment you say, this is just a state, you create space. Space to move, space to choose, space to redefine. And in that space, you begin to see differently, not with denial, but with authority. You begin to look at something that appears fixed and see it as fluid, not yet shaped, not yet decided, because you understand it is not complete until it reflects your state. So instead of asking, how do I fix this? You begin asking, what state would make this irrelevant? Because solving problems at the level of problems keeps them alive, but changing the state dissolves them. This is a higher level of vision, not reacting, creating, not adjusting, becoming. This is also why imagination must be practiced, not occasionally, not when things go wrong, but consistently. Because inner vision becomes stronger with use. The more you see inwardly, the more natural it becomes. The more natural it becomes, the more real it feels. And what feels real begins to express itself. This is where you move beyond surface seeing into creative seeing, where you no longer depend on what is visible, but begin to trust what is felt. And once that trust stabilizes, something shifts deeply. You stop being surprised by change because you understand where it came from. You stop chasing outcomes because you know how they are formed. You stop fearing circumstances because you see through them, not as illusions in the sense of not real, but as reflections in the sense of not final. And that changes everything. Because now you are no longer trapped by appearances. You are working behind them, quietly, consistently, deliberately. And in that, you begin to experience something new. Not control, not force, but alignment. Because what you see within and what you experience without begin to match. Not perfectly at first, but progressively, until one day there is no difference. Because you are no longer seeing reality, you are expressing it. What if imagination is not something you do, but something you are? Not an ability, not a tool, not a technique you apply when needed, but the very structure of your being. Because everything you have ever experienced, you have first experienced inwardly. Every reaction, every expectation, every interpretation, every meaning, all of it began within. And what you call the world has always been shaped by that inner movement. But because imagination feels invisible, you underestimate it. You treat it as secondary, something optional, something unreal. And so you give more authority to what you can see than to what is actually creating what you see. This is the inversion, the quiet mistake. And it is so common that it feels normal. You imagine briefly. Then you look outward for confirmation. You feel something internally. Then you wait to see if it works. You create an inner scene. Then you question it the moment reality doesn't immediately reflect it. But this keeps you divided because you are still treating imagination as separate from reality, instead of seeing that imagination is the source and reality is the reflection. This is why persistence matters so deeply, not because you need to convince the world, but because you need to stabilize your state. Because imagination, when held steadily, becomes identity. And identity is what expresses. So the question is not, did I imagine it correctly? The question is, did I remain it? Because a moment of imagination followed by a return to doubt is not creation. It is interruption. It is starting a movement and then reversing it. and the world reflects that inconsistency. But when imagination becomes continuous, not forced, not intense, but natural, something changes. You stop visiting the desired state and you start living in it. And that is when it begins to feel real, not because you see it yet, but because you are no longer separate from it. Are you imagining something or becoming it? Because imagining without embodiment keeps you outside. You are still looking at it, still observing it, still hoping for it. But becoming changes your position. You are now inside it. You are now the one who has it. And from that place, everything feels different. You think differently, you react differently, you expect differently, and expectation is powerful because expectation directs perception, and perception shapes experience. So when you become the state, you begin to notice things you didn't notice before. Opportunities, openings, connections, moments that align, not because they suddenly appeared, but because your state now allows you to see them. This is why imagination is not escape. It is selection. You are selecting a state and then allowing reality to organize around it. Not by force, but by alignment. And alignment does not require effort. It requires consistency. This is also where most people lose the movement. They imagine something once and expect immediate results. But the old state is still active, still familiar, still dominant. So they return to it without realizing. They react the same way. They think the same thoughts. They feel the same patterns. And then they say, it didn't work. But it did. They just didn't stay in it. Because the world reflects what is consistent, not what is occasional. So if you want to change the reflection, you must stabilize the source. Not perfectly, but persistently. Return to the state again and again and again until it feels natural, until it feels like you. Because once it feels like you, it no longer requires effort. It becomes your baseline. And from that baseline, reality begins to shift quietly, gradually, inevitably. This is why feeling is the secret. Not surface emotion, but the inner knowing of being. Because feeling tells you what you are, not what you want, not what you think, but what you are being. And what you are being is what you experience. So if you feel like someone who is waiting, you will experience delay. If you feel like someone who is uncertain, you will experience instability. If you feel like someone who is already fulfilled, you will experience alignment. Not immediately in every detail, but directionally. And direction leads to result. So instead of asking, when will it happen? Ask, what does it feel like to already be there? And stay there, not for seconds, but long enough to become familiar. Because familiarity is what creates naturalness. And naturalness is what creates reality. This is why imagination must be respected. Not occasionally, but as a way of being, because you are always imagining, even when you think you are not. When you worry, you are imagining. When you expect the worst, you are imagining. When you replay past events, you are imagining. So the question is not, am I imagining? The question is, what am I imagining? And more importantly, am I living in it? Because whatever you repeatedly imagine, you eventually become. And whatever you become, you experience. This is the loop. Not complicated, but exact. So if you want to change your life, do not try to control everything outside. Do not try to fix every situation. Do not try to manage every detail. Instead, change what you are being through imagination, through feeling, through assumption, and remain there. Because the moment you remain, the movement begins. Not visibly at first, but internally. And what moves internally must express externally. It has no choice, because imagination is not separate from reality. It is the beginning of it. What if time has never been the reason things feel delayed, but only the result of you not fully being there yet, because time, as you experience it, is not independent. It stretches when you wait. It slows when you doubt. It expands when you feel distance, but it collapses the moment you become. This is the part most people misunderstand. They think manifestation takes time, but what actually takes time is your willingness to remain in the state, because the moment a state becomes natural, expression follows. Not always instantly in appearance, but instantly in direction. And direction determines outcome. So what you call waiting is not the world taking time. It is you moving in and out of identity. One moment you feel it, the next moment you question it. One moment you believe, the next moment you observe reality and doubt. And that fluctuation creates delay, not because the world is slow, but because the signal is unstable. Reality responds to consistency, not intensity. You can feel something very strongly for a moment and then lose it. And that does not create, because it was not sustained. But if you feel something quietly, steadily, without needing to prove it, that begins to organize reality, because now the state is stable. Are you trying to feel it intensely or naturally? Because intensity often comes from effort, from trying, from forcing, from convincing yourself. But naturalness comes from acceptance, from settling into it, from allowing it to be who you are, and that is what creates. Because reality does not respond to what you try to be. It responds to what you are. So if you are trying, you are still outside. But if you are being, you are inside. And that changes everything. This is also why you must stop watching the clock. Because time only matters when you feel separation. When you feel like it hasn't happened yet. When you feel like you are still waiting. But if you are already there, what are you waiting for? Nothing. You are simply being. And from that being, things begin to move quietly, naturally, without force. This is why some changes feel fast and others feel slow. Not because of the situation, but because of your state. If a state feels natural to you, it expresses quickly. If a state feels unfamiliar, it takes longer to stabilize. But the process is the same. Always become it, remain it, allow it. This is the law. Not complicated, but precise. This is also where trust becomes important. Not trust in something outside, but trust in the process itself. Trust that what you are being is already shaping what you will experience, even if you cannot see it yet, because the unseen is not unreal. It is just not visible yet. And if you keep returning to the same state, it must appear, because appearance follows assumption. Always. This is why doubt is not something to fight. It is something to understand. Doubt simply means you have not fully become it yet. You are still observing from outside, still checking, still measuring, still comparing, and all of that reinforces separation. But the moment you stop checking and start being, doubt fades, not because you forced it away, but because it no longer fits the state. This is why awareness is everything, because awareness allows you to notice when you are in the state and when you have left it. And once you notice, you can return again and again without frustration, without pressure. Just return, because every return strengthens the state, and every strengthened state moves reality. This is also why you must be careful with your reactions, because reactions reveal your state. If something happens and you immediately feel fear, you are still in a state of insecurity. If something happens and you feel calm, you are in a different state, not because the situation changed, but because you did. So instead of trying to control your reactions, observe them. Let them show you where you are, and then choose again. not forcefully, but consciously, because you always have that choice to remain or to shift. And that choice is where your power is, not in changing the world, but in selecting the state, and once selected, remaining. Because the moment you remain, the world begins to follow, not instantly in every detail, but inevitably, because reality is not separate from you. It is shaped by you, through your state, through your identity, through your assumption. So the next time you feel like nothing is happening, pause and ask yourself, am I still being it? Or have you returned to waiting? Because waiting is a state, and it creates more waiting. But being creates expression. So stay in it, not perfectly, but consistently, and watch how everything begins to move, not because time passed, but because you did. What if nothing in your life is truly happening to you, but everything is happening through you, not as a concept, not as philosophy, but as a structure? Because the moment you begin to see that reality is not external to you, another layer opens, a deeper responsibility, a deeper clarity. And at first it can feel uncomfortable, because it removes the last place you used to put blame. No more because of them. No more because of timing. No more because life is unfair. Not because those things never appear, but because they are no longer the source. And when you remove false sources, you are left with the real one. State, identity, being. This is where the shift becomes undeniable, because now you begin to notice something subtle. You are not just creating outcomes. You are creating experiences of people, not controlling them, but meeting them through your state, because the version of someone you experience is not random. It is filtered through what you are being. This is why the same person can appear differently in different moments. Kind one day, distant the next. Supportive in one context, unresponsive in another, and you call it inconsistency. But what if it is reflection? Because when your state shifts, your experience of them shifts. And that does not mean they are changing independently. It means you are meeting a different version of them through a different state. This is what most people miss. They try to change others, convince them, fix them, control their behavior. But behavior is not the source. State is. And if state determines experience, then changing your state changes how they appear in your world. Not magically, but structurally. Because you are not interacting with a fixed version of anyone. You are interacting with the version that corresponds to your state. Are you reacting to people, or to your own state reflected through them? Because once you see this, everything softens. You stop taking things personally, not because you don't care, but because you understand. You understand that what you see is not final. It is relational. It is state dependent. So instead of reacting, you begin to choose. Not their behavior, but your state. And from that, their behavior begins to shift quietly, naturally, without force. This is also why forgiveness becomes effortless. Not because you excuse everything, but because you see beyond it. You see that people are not fixed identities. They are expressions of states, and states can change just as yours can. So instead of holding someone in a negative image, you release them from it. Not for them, but for you. Because the image you hold is the version you experience. So if you continue to see someone as difficult, they will remain difficult. If you continue to see someone as distant, they will remain distant. But if you begin to see them differently, not pretending, but assuming, they begin to change. Because you are meeting them through a new state. This is the deeper level of creation. Not just changing your life, but changing how life appears to you. Because everything is connected to your state. Everything. Even the way people speak to you. Even the way situations unfold. even the opportunities that appear. All of it is filtered through identity. So the real power is not in controlling others, it is in selecting the state from which you meet them. And that selection is always available. Even now, what are you assuming about the people in your life right now? Are you expecting support or resistance? Are you expecting understanding or conflict? Are you expecting connection or distance? Because those expectations are not neutral. They are creative. They shape the interaction before it happens, and then you experience what you expected. Not because you forced it, but because you aligned with it. This is why awareness is so important. Because without awareness, you keep repeating the same patterns unconsciously, automatically. But with awareness, you interrupt the cycle. You see the pattern and you choose differently. Not once, but consistently. Because consistency is what stabilizes a state, and stability is what creates reality. This is also where identity becomes deeper. Because now it is not just about what you have. It is about who you are being in relation to everything. Not just yourself, but others, life, circumstances. Because your identity is not isolated, it is relational. It affects everything you experience. So when you change your identity, you change your world. Not partially, completely. Because everything you experience is connected to who you are being. And once you see that, you stop trying to fix pieces. You change the whole through state, through assumption, through being. And in that, you begin to experience something new. Not effort, not struggle, but flow. Because now you are no longer pushing against reality. You are aligned with it. And alignment creates ease. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is coherent. Because your inner state and outer experience are no longer in conflict. They begin to match. And when they match, life feels different. Not controlled, but responsive. Not random, but precise. Because now you are no longer reacting to life. You are participating in it. Consciously, deliberately, from within. And that changes everything. What if you were never meant to master the world, but to recognize that you are the one expressing it, not controlling every detail, not forcing outcomes, but becoming so clear in your being that reality has no choice but to follow. Because that is where everything has been leading. Not to more effort, not to more knowledge, but to a shift in identity so complete that separation dissolves. You are no longer here trying to make life happen. You are here remembering that life has always been happening through you. And the moment that becomes real, not as an idea, but as a felt knowing, something settles deeply, quietly. You stop searching, not because you gave up, but because you arrived. Because now you understand there is nowhere to get to, only something to be. And that changes everything. You stop asking, how do I make this happen? And you begin asking, who am I being right now? Because that is the only place creation occurs. Not in action, not in strategy, but in identity. And identity is not something you discover. It is something you assume and then live. This is why the final shift is so subtle. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is not something others necessarily see at first. It is internal, precise, almost invisible. But once it happens, everything begins to align. Because now you are no longer divided. You are not wanting one thing and being another. You are not hoping and doubting at the same time. You are not imagining and then questioning it. You are simply being. And that being is stable, natural, effortless. Because it is no longer something you are trying to hold. It is who you are. Are you still trying to become, or have you already decided? Because trying keeps you in motion, always reaching, always adjusting, always almost there. But deciding ends the movement. It places you in the state. Now, and from that place, everything unfolds, not because you made it happen, but because you stopped interfering with it. This is why the deepest level of creation feels like surrender, not giving up, but letting go of resistance, letting go of the need to control, letting go of the idea that something outside must change first. Because once you release that, you realize nothing was ever outside. It was always within, as state, as assumption, as identity. And the world was simply reflecting it. This is the final understanding. You are not in the world. The world is in you, not physically, but experientially. Everything you see, everything you feel, everything you encounter is filtered through your consciousness. And consciousness is not passive, it is creative. So when you change your consciousness, you change everything. Not because you manipulate reality, but because you are the source of it. And once that becomes clear, fear begins to dissolve. Not instantly, but naturally. Because fear comes from separation, from believing something outside has power over you. But when you see that everything is coming through you, fear loses its foundation. You are no longer at the mercy of life. You are participating in it. And participation creates confidence. Not false confidence, but quiet certainty. Because now you know, if something appears, it came from a state. And if it came from a state, it can change. By changing the state. So nothing is final. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is beyond movement. Because everything is state, and states can be selected. This is the freedom. Not freedom from life, but freedom within it. The freedom to choose who you are being, regardless of what appears. And that choice is always available. Even now. So the question is no longer, what do I want? The question is, who am I willing to be? Because what you are willing to be determines everything. Not what you say, not what you hope, not what you try, but what you are. And once you accept that fully, something shifts permanently. You stop waiting, you stop doubting, you stop searching, because you realize you were never separate from what you seek. You were only separate in identity. And now that identity has changed, you are no longer the one who is trying to create. You are the one who is creating, always, with every assumption, with every feeling, with every I am. And that realization is the end of the search. Not because there is nothing left to explore, but because you now know where it all begins, within as you. You were never waiting for reality to change. Reality was waiting for you.